Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hay Festival Book Club. My name is Razia Iqbal, and we have a very special guest today, Salman Rushdie. His latest book is called Knife: Meditations After an Attempted Murder. And it is a remarkable response and riposte to, as well as an engagement with the heinous violent act committed against him on the morning of August the 12th, 2022, in Chautauqua Institution in upstate New York. He has been on a whirlwind international book tour, and we are grateful he's with us today. Before that conversation, just a few quick reminders that the Hay Festival Global is a charity with year-round activities to connect audiences with artists. Thank you to everyone for their continued support and engagement. Knife by Salman Rushdie is the Hay Festival Book Club pick for May. Copies are available for purchase on the Hay Festival website, or of course, you can buy a copy from your local bookseller. Hay Festival Book Club is supported by Unwin Charitable Trust. June's selection is Marlon James's A Brief History of 7 Killings, with details about a very special event with him online now. Salman Rushdie really needs no introduction, but I always think that feels unfair, so here goes. He is an award-winning writer and among the best-known of literary figures in the world. He's written 16 novels. One of them, his second, Midnight's Children, won the Booker Prize, as well as the Booker of Bookers. He has also written several books of non-fiction, including 2 memoirs. The latest, Knife, is the one we're going to talk about today. His work has been translated into more than 40 languages. He's a former president of PEN American Center and was knighted in 2007 for services to literature, and was made a Companion of Honor in the Queen's last birthday honours list in 2022. Salman Rushdie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello there.
Now, of course, I wish you did not have to write this book, which is to say that I wish you did not have to go through the shocking attack on you back in August 2022. How are you doing today?
I'm not so bad, thank you. I think I'm what is technically called a medical miracle.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that miracle in a moment. I suppose an important question is a question that you yourself have asked in the writing of Knife. For all of the world's focus on the events of the day and the aftermath, as a writer, you had to decide what the story was going to be in this book. What was the kind of wider universal insight that would turn this book into one which would sustain the reader?
Yeah, well, exactly, because I thought, of course, the reason for writing it was this knife attack, but that's not enough for a book. I thought I can tell the story of the knife attack in 15 pages. So if there is a book here, I thought, what is the subject? So how do you expand from that? And I began to think that what I needed to do was to write a book which contained a portrait of life as well as death, a portrait of beauty as well as ugliness, and love as well as hatred. And that gave me that. Once I understood that, I began to understand how to proceed.
You were, though, fairly sure that you wouldn't write about this, and that your agent, Andrew Wiley, was sure that you would.
Yeah, well, Andrew and I, like an old married couple at this point, I mean, we've been friends, and he's been my agent for something like 36 years. And it's by far my longest relationship, including marriages and so on. So he knows me very well. And actually, when I first spoke to him after the attack, he said, don't write anything for a year, just concentrate on getting better. And I thought that was good advice. And then he changed his mind, not very long afterwards. And he said, you're going to write about it. And I said, Andrew, no, I'm not. I think I'm maybe not going to write about it. And he said, yeah, no, you'll write about it. And he was right. what happened was that for about 6 or 7 months after the attack, I mean, frankly, I wasn't really able to think about writing anything. Um, and then there was just a day when, by which time I was actually back at home, when I just thought to myself, maybe today is a day to go and sit at the desk and open up the computer, and I just, see what happens. So I did that. And, I have this folder on my computer where I just put in scraps of ideas, things that might possibly turn into a story, or might be a little bit of a character in a book, or just little things. And so I thought, let me look in that kind of slush pile, and see what's there. And so I started reading through that material, and I just thought, this is stupid. This is just silly. I can't go back to this, because there's this really, really big subject sitting right in front of me. And to look at all this other stuff feels like avoiding the subject. And so I understood that the only way past this was to go through it. And then I thought, okay, let's do that. Let's do it. And was able to begin work.
I'm interested in what your thinking was and how you thought about writing it at that moment, when you knew that you had to go through it in order to come out the other side and possibly write another novel or something else. I mean, did you think, I kind of know the shape of it, I know the sorts of meditations that I'm going to be reflecting on?
No, I had no idea. I mean, I really had to discover it. I thought, as I said, that I wanted to write about things, a broader context than just the attack. So I knew that I would want to write about the reasons why writers get attacked in this way, and so to talk about the fact that it's not just me. There are writers in danger all around the world, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't completely solipsistic. I didn't want it to be just poor me. But I think the key was when I began to think of the book as a sort of triangle, with me at one point of it, and with the attacker at the second point, and with my wife Eliza at the third point. I thought it's a book about three people, and one of them embodies all these negative values of violence and hatred and so on, and the other one embodies all the positive values of love and care and so on. And so I thought, okay, it's kind of a triangle, this book. And the moment I saw it in that way, it showed me how to go forward.
It certainly comes across as a meditation on many things, but as you've just alluded to, the kind of the force of violence versus the power of love is definitely the kind of central spine of the book, if you like. But let's go back to you being a medical miracle, because you detail in quite graphic and with real honesty about the impact of the violence on your body. That felt like a very conscious decision, that you wanted to describe the kind of, as you describe it, the intimacy of the attack of the knife from this man.
I mean, I sort of wanted the reader to come on the journey with me. One of the things that my editor in New York said to me when I was first talking to him about the book is, he said, very few people have the experience that you had, which is to get this close to death and then come back from it and be able to tell the story. And he said, so, tell the story. And so that was very good advice. So I started off by wanting to talk about that moment of being as close to dead as you can get without being actually dead. And one of the things that I wanted to say is what didn't happen. There was, as I say in the book, there's nothing supernatural about it. There's no tunnel of light. There's no pearly gates, no fires of hell, no angels, no nothing. Just lying on the floor bleeding. And what I'd always have always thought is that death is an ending. That it's not a gateway to another reality. And certainly my experience of getting that close to it confirmed that. There was no gateways opening anywhere. And so that was useful information for me. And I thought, useful, I tell you as well, because there will be a moment when you get there. I just got a preview, and one of the things about getting that kind of a preview is that you really don't want to see the movie.
I mean, it's interesting to me that you're making a joke about it, because even in the detailing of the horror of the attack of the knife, I mean, it was 27 seconds long. I've worked in radio and in television, so that kind of timing, 27 seconds can feel like quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for ordinary folks, if you say not quite half a minute, it doesn't feel like that much. But if it's half a minute in close proximity to somebody with a knife, they can do a lot of damage. And afterwards, I mean, at the time I wasn't counting, but afterwards I did count. And I think the final score is that there were 15 different injuries in the course of 27 seconds. So that's a lot.
It certainly is. And I think one of the things about you being a medical miracle is not just that you were lucky and that you dedicate the book to the people who saved your life. One of the doctors said that part of your luck was that your assailant did not really do a very good job. He did not know how to harm you fatally.
Yeah, no, he missed a lot of targets, which would have ended the story right there. So, for example, there was a very bad cut across my neck, right, under my jaw, right, all the way across here. But it did not sever the artery. And there were 3 stab wounds in a line down the center of my chest. But he missed the heart. And so there are things that, if he made contact with either of those things, then we wouldn't be having this nice chat. And my younger son Milan, being 27, and therefore doing things that 27-year-old people do, started researching knife attacks. And he said to me, Dad, I've been looking up all this stuff, and there are people who get stabbed once and they die. And he said, Dad, you got stabbed 15 times. And I said, yeah. I said, I guess this is my superpower. But that's the extent of how lucky I was. Yes, and the surgeon, what I discovered about hospitals, which maybe you know as well, is that when doctors think you're going to be okay, then a kind of black humor emerges. And that line about, the man who attacked you had no idea how to kill a man with a knife is an example of doctors' black humor. But, maybe it's true. He missed.
Yeah, I mean, thank goodness for that on so many different levels. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that moment when the man rushes onto the stage, because in the book you say, so it's you've come.
Yeah, what had happened is that right at the beginning, way back in 1989, when the threats against me began, obviously the danger level was very much higher then, because right at that point the danger was state-sponsored terrorism. It was professional assassins being dispatched by the Iranian government. So that was much more dangerous. And so, of course, I did sometimes have to imagine to myself that such a moment might arise, that somebody somebody came out of somewhere and rushed at me. So, yeah, I had thought about that, but then I basically stopped thinking about it, because I moved to New York City in just after the millennium, just the very beginning of the year 2000, and for the next more than 23 years, I led a pretty normal writer's life. And I was sitting at home doing my writing, but going on book tours, being at literary festivals. I mean, actually helping to start a literary festival, and giving lectures and doing all the stuff that writers get asked to do. And there was never a hint of trouble. And also, as well as that, I mean, I was in touch with kind of security professionals, both in the UK and in the US. And they both said that as far as they could see, there was no real remaining threat. So I had come to feel that those days were gone. That we live in a time, in which the subject changes very fast, and people have new things to be preoccupied by. And I thought that this subject was in the distant past. And so when I saw this man, yes, it did remind me of this old part of my life where I had imagined such an attack. But it also felt like a kind of time warp. It felt like something out of another age, sort of erupting into the present. It felt like he was like a time traveler, arriving from 35 years ago in the present moment. So in that sense, it wasn't expected. It was very much a surprise.
You don't make much of it in the book, but I think you mention it a couple of times. You are critical of the complete lack of security at the venue.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've done a lot of lecture events in my life, and one of the things that people who run these things say to you is that the first priority in organizing any kind of lecture event is to make the stage a safe place for whoever's on the stage. And on this occasion, that wasn't the case. And it's partly because Chautauqua is this kind of innocent place from another age. It's very sweet and very pretty and full of gentle, kind of white-haired liberal folks coming to spend the summer by the lake and listen to talks about and listen to music, and people don't lock their doors at night. And it just feels like this is the last place on earth where something like this could happen. And I think that's how they felt. And so they didn't feel the need of having a kind of security procedure. They do now.
Yeah, I bet they do. I mean, anyone who is familiar with your writing, it will not have escaped their attention that in some ways, if one were to look for parallels, there is a sort of eerie mirroring from your fictional works, the kind of shattering of idylls. And the way in which you've written this memoir does suggest that too, because you describe the festival as you just had, and the night before was really beautiful, and the moon over the lake and so on. And then there was this rupture.
Yeah. And the spooky thing is that the attacker was already there the night before. He'd arrived, and he had false ID, and he was kind of, I don't know, sleeping rough, I guess. He was just hanging out, sussing the place out, and I guess trying to decide how he would proceed. But I was walking around with a couple of friends, having dinner in a restaurant, and strolling through the night with this beautiful full moon, and not knowing that I could have bumped into him at any moment. That feels odd.
Yeah, I'm sure. You make choices in writing this memoir the way that you have along the way, and a really big choice is not to name the assailant. Why is that?
I just didn't want his name in my book. But also, I just thought, okay, you've had your 27 seconds of celebrity, and now you should go back to being nobody. You should be a number in a orange jumpsuit, and disappear from the world for hopefully a prolonged period of time. And I actually remembered something that Margaret Thatcher used to say about the IRA, which obviously
the oxygen of publicity.
Oxygen of publicity. Deny them the oxygen of publicity. I remembered that phrase, and I thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to deny him the oxygen of publicity. So it's one of the few moments in my life when I've been inspired by Margaret Thatcher.
And it was, of course, Margaret Thatcher's government during the time of the fatwa, and the government that provided you with the personal security that you had.
Yeah, I discovered a very interesting fact about Margaret Thatcher the couple of times that I met her. Is that she's very touchy-feely. You wouldn't expect it.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Yeah, and she put her hands on your arm, and that are you all right, dear, etc. And I would think, oh gosh, I'd be touched up by the Prime Minister. But it was actually quite sweet and rather disarming. This sort of solicitude. So yeah, that was something I would not have expected from the Iron Lady.
Let's stay with the assailant, or rather with a section of the book in which you have made a decision to have these imaginary conversations with him. I think you have 4 piece conversations. So this is, this is a memoir. This is very much a meditation on the knife as metaphor, which I would like to talk about shortly. But just tell me a little about the decision to do that, because in those sections, it's about 30 pages of the whole book. You become the novelist again. You're imagining a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about I was thinking about Socrates and Socratic dialogues, and the idea of the examined life, and as he famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And so that was part of why I put it in the form of these conversations, these dialogues between us. Initially, I had this kind of fantasy that maybe I should go and try and meet him. And then I thought, I'm not sure anything very constructive would come out of that, because I don't feel that he would open up his heart to me. I don't think he would tell me what what made him tick, and so on. And I guessed that what I would probably get were some ideological cliches, which wouldn't get me very far in understanding him. And I remembered there's a moment in the book where I talk about this incident where Samuel Beckett was the victim of a knife attack in a street in Paris, in Montparnasse, attacked by a pimp with the rather wonderful name of Proudhon. So Proudhon, the pimp, almost killed him with a knife blow, and Beckett survived. And Beckett actually went to the court when the guy was on trial, and said to him, "Why did you do it?" And the man answered only, he said, "Je ne sais pas, monsieur, je m'excuse. I don't know, sir, I'm sorry." I thought, yeah, that's useless. That doesn't tell you anything. And I thought in some version of that, I would also get something useless. So then I thought, let me make him up. And in a way, my best revenge on him is to make him my character. He belongs to me now.
It gives you control in some ways.
Yeah, because also I did feel that there's a sort of absence in what we know about him. That's to say, at the time of the attack, he was only 24. He had no criminal record. He was not on any terrorism watch list. He wasn't, associating with shady individuals. He was a 24-year-old kid living in his mother's basement in New Jersey. And to go from that kind of 0 point to murder is a very big jump, which in some ways is not entirely explained by saying he was radicalized by some Islamic individual. And so I thought, how do I fill that space? How can I imagine him in a way that is convincing to me? Because on admission, he knew nothing about me. And he didn't take the trouble to find out anything about me. So what is that somebody decides to commit murder as their first crime, to commit murder, and murder of a total stranger who you don't even bother to find out about? I remember saying to my editor, if I wrote a character like that, you would say this character doesn't work.
Yeah, no motivation, no
not enough, undermotivated. So I thought I've got to try and see if I can fill that gap, and to, if you like, to create a believable character who might have been able to do this. So that, that's what I think. But I thought actually I quite enjoyed the idea that instead of him killing me, I got to make him up.
So let's talk about the third point of the triangle that you alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, which is your wife, Rachel Eliza Griffiths, a writer herself, and
yes,
and in a way, the story about her is the manifestation of the force of violence versus the power of love.
Yeah, and the way she describes it. She wrote a rather good article about this, which was published in The Guardian, is that we were already in the middle of a love story. That we'd actually been in the middle of that story for like 5.5 years. And then this event, in a way, was an attempt to turn it into a murder story. And then what we've had to do since is to find our way back to the love story. It's to kind of emerge from the shadow of this violence and reconstruct as much as possible what we had before. And so I also, as well as the triangle, I began to think of it as a love story with a murder story in the middle. And yes, one of the things I talk about in the book is how hard it is to write about happiness. And because happiness is kind of boring, nothing happens.
It is a challenge.
Yeah. But I felt that I wanted to try because we actually had a very long period of happiness, which this attack interrupted. So I wanted to show that too, that the violence was done not only to me, but to us and to our happiness. So I had to try and write about it. And yeah, you've met Eliza. She's very easy to fall in love with, and she's also a brilliant writer. So there's that we were. We were writers who really admired each other's work. There was, apart from anything else, and it had been very kind of no relationship was entirely trouble-free, but it was pretty largely trouble-free. Very okay relationship. And then we just had to try and put it back together because I'm not the only person who was traumatized. So the trauma happened to her as well. In many ways, some aspects of the trauma she experienced more than me, because when I was lying in hospital, trying to stay alive, I wasn't looking at me because she made sure that there were no mirrors around, but she was looking at me. And so she got to see the worst of it in a way that I didn't until much, much later when I looked at the pictures she'd made of what I looked like then. And she had to behave heroically. She had, in my presence, she had to be like strong and loving and caring and etc. And then every so often she would go out of the room and scream. But she wouldn't let me see her trauma, which was a kind of unbelievably brave thing to do.
This shattering, this rupture that occurred in all of your lives, not just your wife, but your family, your two sons, your sister, your friends, all the people who care about you. To what extent do you now feel you're obviously out in the world again, but profoundly changed by it? Do you?
I don't know about profoundly changed. I think most people who know me would say that I'm, broadly speaking, the same person. I think some things do change. I mean, for example, there's once again a kind of requirement for caution of a kind that had kind of gone away. Yeah, my family is more interested in security issues than me. They want to make sure that things are okay. And I think probably the one thing that is different is that when you come this close to dying, you get a really good look at it. It doesn't ever completely go away. So it's I feel that it sort of stays in a corner of your mind. That knowledge, that the experience of having got so close. And that's like just a sort of a little shadow that's just there all the time, and I suspect will probably be there all the time. I mean, most of us. I mean, I know we all know that what's coming down the road, but most of us, I think, just live our lives. We don't sit there agitated about the end. But I think when you get a good look at the end, then you know what it is, and that knowledge, yes, it does affect you. It does affect you.
Let's talk about the bigger meditations in the book. You alluded to the story about Samuel Beckett. The other Nobel laureate that you refer to in the book is the knife attack against Naguib Mahfouz, the Egyptian novelist. And then there are also meditations on the knife as metaphor and those fictitious knife stories, whether it's, the Polanski story in
Knife in the Water.
I'm trying to think. Knife in the Water, the Philip Pullman Subtle Knife book, Kafka's book. And I just wondered about you do this in all of your books, I think, anyway. There are just these references that become wider and wider. And I suspect that this is just an instinctive thing in you as a writer, that you choose to do that.
I just try to say this is how my mind works. It's this kind of free associative thing. So once the subject is declared, the subject is knife, it makes me think of a lot of knives, not just the ones in the kitchen drawer. And then I thought that a knife is also, the knife is a tool, and one of the differences as a weapon between a knife and a gun is that a gun has only one purpose, which is to perform an act of violence. Knife can be for all sorts of things, many of which are innocent. And then I thought that knife as a metaphor could be a description of language itself. That the act of writing is a kind of knife. It's a way of opening the world. It's a way of cutting things open so you can see what they mean and what's inside them. And so then I thought, okay, then language is the knife that I can use. Not to injure anybody, but to reveal things, to open things up. And so I began to think of the book as being my, kind of metaphorically speaking, my knife, my way of fighting back. Let's say the tool that I had at my disposal to fight back with. And so then by the time I finished the book, I thought, well, it's not just about a knife. It kind of, in a way, is a knife. And I think of it that way now.
And interestingly, at the end of Victory City, your most recent novel, the last page ends with the voice of the character Pampa Campana, the narrator, the author of the novel, and ends with, all that remains in this is this city of words. Words are the only victors. And in that sense, what this book is too, is you having prevailed because you've written this book and you are still with us.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's so. But I do think what she's saying in the book, she's writing at the end of an empire, and what she's saying is, empires rise and fall, kings come and go. What remains is the way in which their story is told. What remains is the story of them. And so the writer of the story is the one who has the last word. And I mean, I think that's true in a larger sense about history and how it's made. And if we now, for example, if we think about Napoleon's Russian campaign of 1812, it won't be long before we think about War and Peace. And in a way, Tolstoy owns it. War and Peace is the greatest thing ever written about that, and it becomes his. And I thought maybe I can do on a much smaller canvas, more personal canvas. I can try and do something of the same sort. That I can write the book of, and it's actually had the one thing about the book that has been actually a kind of healing thing for me is that now I'm the author of the book about the thing. So instead of just talking about the fact that somebody stuck a knife in me, I'm talking about the fact that I wrote a book about somebody sticking a knife in me.
Right. So you're the writer.
I'm the writer again. Yeah. And not just the victim.
Yeah, which was something that you have spoken about a lot since 1989, since the fatwa was imposed on you, that it became the thing that everyone only ever wanted to talk to you about, as opposed to the many, many novels that you wrote after the Satanic Verses.
Yeah, I mean, that was, the Satanic Verses was my 5th published book, my 4th novel, one book of nonfiction. And this is my 22nd. So more than 3/4 of my life as a writer has happened since I wrote the Satanic Verses. And yet I keep being dragged back there to a book that was published in 1988, which I started writing in about 1985. So 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it just feels, read another book of mine.
August 1988, I remember it well. I came to, I think, one of the first events at the ICA in London when you were talking about it. Let's turn now to questions from members of the audience. John is asking, you described in detail the premonition that you had before the attack, and that really did shock me in the book, I have to say. The question is, did it change your belief in the supernatural?
My books are full of the supernatural. People levitate. People live for 247 years. People turn into monsters at night and tear people's heads off. So, as a writer, I have no problem with the supernatural. But I've always thought of it as metaphorical rather than actual. I don't think, for example, Kafka believed that people really could turn into giant insects. I don't believe that Garcia Marquez really thought that holy girls could ascend into heaven while the neighbors were doing the washing. These are metaphors, and I still think of it in that way. I think that if I was to think, I mean, I was quite spooked by the dream at the time that I had it, the kind of premonitory dream.
Mm.
But I mean, I can rationalize it. You know, I knew that the venue that I was going to speak in was called an amphitheater. And so the dream turned it from an amphitheater into a kind of Colosseum-like space with a Ridley Scott-like gladiator in it. So, you know, this is how dreams work. And so eventually I thought, you know, we don't run our lives based on whether we had a bad dream or not.
Absolutely.
And maybe we should have.
Mm. Well, I mean, I can't imagine, you know, you have attempted for so long to, you know, and succeeded in just continuing to live your life in the decades after the fatwa. So it would seem very out of character, it seems to me. Another question here from Leela, perhaps Lila. Leela, let's say. It's incredible that you found the ability to write about the attack so soon afterwards. This is a question about catharsis. Did you find it helpful?
Yeah, I guess so. You know, I mean, I think I've always slightly resisted the idea of writing as therapy. You know, because in my view, like therapy is therapy and writing is writing. I did have the help of a very good therapist who I was talking to really quite frequently, and who has been, continues to be an important part in the recovery. And I said it's the only book I've written while talking about it to a therapist. And I think what he helped me to do was to stay on a kind of even keel. Because, of course, the risk of doing something like this is the risk of re-traumatization. You know, that you go back to relive the thing and it in a way kind of happens to you all over again. Now, I think the reason that didn't happen was because I was in therapy. The one thing that I do feel, having written it, is that I feel I've kind of, to my satisfaction, dealt with it. You know, and I think I can put it to one side now and proceed into the rest of my life. So in that sense, it was very useful. It was a way of handling it, and there's that moment at the end of the book in which I say to Eliza that I felt lighter, having reached the end of the story, and I did have that feeling of a burden being removed, and so I think the book did help to do that. Yes.
So both Thomas and Finn, I think, have asked questions that have already been answered about not naming the attacker and also the attack being described in great detail. Let's turn to a question from Nirja Narang. Firstly, deep admiration for the courage and resilience that you've shown in the face of this attack and for always standing up for free speech. And then the question is, are you less fearful of death now, or do you feel the presence of death more now? I mean, you talked a little about that shadow that's always there.
No, I mean, I think it is true to say that I feel the presence a bit more. I'm trying not to let it bother me. You know, I mean, there was a habit that I developed in the early years of the danger. You know, I read about how people deal with the question of fear, and quite often people have all sorts of interesting strategies for how they deal with it. And my little strategy was that I imagined a little box, quite small box, and I would put the fear in the box and I'd close the lid, and then I would put the box in the corner of the room, which is not to deny it's there. I know it's there, and I know what's inside it. But it's a little box and it's in the corner of the room and it's shut, and now I can get on with have my day. So I still use the strategy of the little box, and it works. It works because it's a way of recognizing the truth of the thing, but not letting it rule your life.
Everyone who is watching this can see that you have one side of your eye completely covered up on your glasses. You are completely blind in that right eye, and you talk about it in the book that one of the fears, abiding fears that you've always had, is about going blind.
Yeah.
Just talk us through how you come to terms with that, if indeed you have now.
I haven't really. I'm really pissed off about it. But yes, I think, in Orwell's 1984, when you go into kind of room 101, what you find in room 101 is the worst thing in the world. And the worst thing in the world is different for everybody. So for Winston Smith, the anti-hero of the book, the worst thing in the world is rats. And for me, the worst thing in the world is blindness. And I always thought that if I was deprived of other senses, I could probably do without taste and touch. Hearing would be difficult, but I could maybe begin to do without that. But sight, I've always thought, I don't know how I'd do without that. If you're a writer, your whole business is to look, to observe, and to try and see the world clearly, and maybe try and see it a little better than other people. So losing eyesight would be devastating. I mean, I read about writers who went blind, I've obviously read about Borges. And it's a very hard thing to deal with. So thank goodness it's only one eye. The other one seems to be, touch wood, doing okay right now. I have to make my left eye do the work of two.
Yeah, I mean, you're also, I mentioned earlier your sense of humor in the book. I mean, one place where it does come in is when you're talking about trying to get used to just using that one eye, and what happens in your daily life with that.
So you get to be so clumsy, is what happens. Your spatial awareness isn't what it should be. So, for example, I bump my head all the time. If I'm getting into a car, I bump my head on the car door frame. And it annoys the hell out of me, because I know what it is that's doing it. And in the beginning, it was very difficult for me to pour water from a jug into a glass. I would miss the glass, because again, my spatial awareness wasn't what it should be. That actually the brain has managed to adapt to that. So I can now, I'm happy to say, pour myself a glass of water. But it is very. You have to learn how to. When you're in rehab, which I was, the kind of one aspect of the therapy was to train you how to look into the blind area. That you have to make normally, if you're walking, you just walk along. But I have to train myself to kind of look, to make sure that there's nobody coming that way. Because, as you know, in New York, everybody's walking very fast, looking at their phone. So it's easy to bump into people, especially if there's a whole quadrant of your field of vision that isn't there anymore. So, I'm having to learn, but it's irritating.
I'll ask you about your politics in relation to this attack, because you've clearly lived with the threat of it for a very long time, even though for a very long time you also carried on living as normal a life as it was possible for you to do so. But in what way has your politics about the ideology that spurred on the fatwa in the first place, the manifestation of this particular attack, how has that shifted or not in your mind? Well,
I mean, it's just become more sharply focused, if you like, and I always had a low opinion of Islamic fanaticism. It's a little lower now. And it makes me want people to notice what religious fanaticism does in the world. And I think sometimes if that's not part of your daily life experience, it's easy to look in other directions. But clearly, one of the facts of my life has been that I've been obliged to look in that direction for a long time.
And it is so interesting to me because in the immediate aftermath of the furore over the satanic verses, you know, very few people looked into the fact that when you were at university, you were studying Islam.
Yeah,
You know, and so you make the distinction between Islam and Islamic fanaticism, the kind of
yeah,
politicization of the faith.
yeah. I mean, look, for example, if you grow up as I did in India, the Indian Muslim community has always, I mean, has almost no extremist element. It's very influenced by Sufism. It's kind of mysticism. Um, and one of the things that's happened is that, in a way, little bits of Hinduism have seeped into Indian Islam, and little bits of Islam have seeped into Indian Hinduism. And so it never felt like an unusually aggressive ideology, you know, at all. It just felt like it's one of the available ways of thinking. I mean, I came from an Indian Muslim family, of which some parts of my family were very much believers, and as it happened, my particular bit, my parents, were not really. But you know, my grandfather went on the pilgrimage to Mecca, and so on. So I grew up amongst a very liberal, tolerant, open-minded Muslim family. So that's my starting point. Was that, and this phenomenon of extremism has developed in our time, partly because of the rise of of the Ayatollahs in Iran, and partly because of the rise of the Wahhabi sect in Saudi Arabia, heavily funded by the Saudi royal family. So these very extreme versions of Islam have had enormous financial support put behind them, and have spread. And I'm not a big admirer of those.
The likeness of which you spoke presumably means that at some stage, once you have rested from this tour, there will be more writing, more fiction.
I hope so. You know, I mean, I've written one thing since I finished writing this book, which is that I mean, not a long thing. It's a long story. And I don't even know what I think about it yet. I have to go back and look at it and see what I think. But I will. All I can say about it to you right now is that it's a ghost story. And I've never written a ghost story, so I always like to find things to do that I haven't done before.
Are you just a final question, Salman? I mean, are you now done with this, or have you made a decision about whether, because there will be a court case, there will be both a federal case against this man as well as a state case. Will you be involved in that in person?
Well, I mean, if they want me, I can't. I have to go. You know, I have had a conversation, Zoom conversation with the district attorney, and with the U.S. Attorney, and I think at least the district attorney is of the opinion that he would want me to testify, which would mean one day, you know. It's just inconvenient because Chautauqua is kind of hard to get to. So, I mean, by road, it's like 7.5 hours from New York City, or you have to fly to Buffalo and then you have to drive for 2 hours. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere.
It's difficult to get to. It's not easy. Yeah.
No, but I think I will do that if required.
I wasn't telling the truth. I have one final question. I mean, one of the things that has come through the book as well is just the enormous amount of support and love that you were given, that you saw, that you experienced in the immediate aftermath. I mean, that must be a real fillip for you.
Yeah, that was really important. You know, I mean, I actually at the very beginning I was only dimly aware of it because I was trying too hard just to survive. But yeah, it was very important because I think, you know, I was at my lowest ebb at that point, physically, but also mentally and emotionally, and to have such a sort of tidal wave of sympathy and solidarity and friendship and affection, and it just not only did it mean a lot, but it actually was strengthening. It actually helped me deal with what I had to deal with. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, because it really made a difference.
Salman, so many people are so grateful that you have made it through. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is the book we've been talking about, Knife: Meditations After an Attempted Murder. It is a remarkable piece of work. Salman, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, we would be very grateful if you could let viewers know that the programme for Hay Festival, Hay on Wye 2024 in Wales, starts tomorrow, taking place on the 23rd of May till the 2nd of June. Tickets for the events are still available and can be booked online now. Salman Rushdie, thanks for being with us on the Hay Book Club.
Thank you.